What if the problem isn't your memory at all? Think about it. You forget names seconds after hearing them. You study for hours only to blank out during the exam. You walk into a room and suddenly have no idea why you're there. It feels like your brain is failing you. But here's the twist. Your memory isn't broken. It's just never been trained the right way. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover a system that can completely change how your brain stores and recalls information. Not a handful of random tricks, not surface-level advice, but a structured way to actually take control of your memory. And if you stick with this, something surprising happens. You stop second-guessing yourself. You start trusting your mind again. Let's start where most people never do, by understanding what's really going on inside your head. Most people believe memory is about intelligence. They say things like, "I'm just not good at remembering," or "I don't have a strong brain." But that's not true. Memory isn't a gift you're born with, it's a skill you build. Here's a simple way to see it. Imagine your brain as a massive library. Every piece of information you come across, a name, a date, a concept, is like a book being added to the shelves. But here's the problem. Most people just toss the book somewhere and walk away. No labeling, no organization, no revisiting. So when you need that information later, it's not that it's gone, it's just buried. Now let's break this down even further. Your memory has two main stages, short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory is like writing on a whiteboard. It's quick, temporary, and easily erased. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is like saving something permanently in a notebook you can return to anytime. The issue? Most people never move information from that temporary whiteboard into permanent storage. They hear a name once and never repeat it. They read something without connecting to it. They cram information, then never revisit it again. So of course it disappears. Picture this. You're at a gathering and someone introduces himself. "Hey, I'm Jason." You smile, nod, maybe even have a conversation. But 5 minutes later, someone asks, "What was his name?" And your mind goes blank. Why? Because your brain never treated that information as important. You didn't repeat it, you didn't connect it to anything familiar, you didn't visualize it, so your brain simply let it go. Now imagine a different approach. You meet him again, but this time you immediately think, Jason, like Jason Statham. Maybe you notice a resemblance. You say his name back. "Nice to meet you, Jason." Later, you use it again in conversation. Now something changes. You've repeated it, you've connected it, you've made it stand out. And suddenly, remembering becomes easy. That's the shift you need to understand. Memory isn't about trying harder, it's about processing smarter. Once you realize this, everything else starts to make sense. Because if you keep feeding your brain information without understanding how it actually stores it, you'll always feel like you're forgetting everything. But when you learn how the system works, you finally start working with your brain instead of against it. And that brings us to something even more important, something most people completely ignore: attention. Here's a hard truth. You can't remember something you never truly noticed in the first place. It sounds obvious, but think about your daily life. How often are you physically present, but mentally somewhere else? You're listening, but also scrolling, reading, but also thinking about something else, watching, but not fully focused. And later, you wonder why nothing sticks. Your brain is constantly filtering information. Every second, it's deciding what matters and what doesn't. And the deciding factor is simple: what you pay attention to. If your focus is weak, your memory will be weak. Imagine getting out of a car after a long day. You're tired, distracted, maybe checking your phone. You pay, step out, and walk away. A few minutes later, panic hits. You left something important behind. Now you try to remember the car, the driver, the license plate. Nothing. Not because your brain failed, but because you never gave it a reason to remember. Now picture a different version of that moment. Before stepping out, you pause. You glance at the car. You notice the color. Maybe you even say to yourself,
White car, plate ends in 8473. Just a few seconds of true attention, and suddenly you've created a memory. That's the power of focus. It's not about time, it's about presence. From now on, when something matters, don't rush past it. Pause, look, listen, repeat it in your mind. Even 5 seconds of true attention can be the difference between forgetting forever and remembering for life.
Now, here's where things get interesting, because even with full attention, most people still struggle to remember one simple reason. They rely on words. But your brain doesn't think in words. It thinks in images. Pause for a second. If I say elephant, what do you see? You don't picture letters floating in the air. You instantly see a massive gray animal, maybe swinging its trunk, maybe walking through a field. That's how your brain stores information, through pictures, not plain text. So if you're trying to remember something using only words, you're working against your own biology. The solution is simple but powerful. Turn information into images. Let's say you meet someone named Lily. If you just repeat Lily, 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 it might stick for a moment, but it'll fade quickly. Now imagine this instead. You picture her surrounded by white lilies, maybe even holding a bouquet. Suddenly, her name isn't just a sound, it's a visual scene. And your brain loves that. The more unusual, exaggerated, or even ridiculous the image, the stronger it becomes, because your brain is wired to remember what stands out, not what blends in. Take a random word like volcano. Don't just think of a mountain. Imagine a giant birthday cake exploding with molten chocolate, lava spilling everywhere, heat rising, maybe even hearing a loud boom. Now it's not just a word, it's an experience. And experiences stick. This becomes even more powerful when you're trying to remember multiple things at once. Instead of forcing yourself to memorize a list, you turn it into a visual story. For example, imagine you need to remember milk, eggs, a book, shoes, and a cat. Don't repeat them like a robot. Build a scene. Picture a giant carton of milk sitting on a couch, reading a book. It's wearing oversized shoes, and a cat with glasses is watching closely while eggs fall from the ceiling like snow. It sounds ridiculous, and that's exactly why it works. Because now your brain isn't trying to store 5 separate items. It's remembering one connected, vivid moment. And that leads to the next level. Your brain isn't just built for images, it's built for stories. Think about it. You can forget a list in minutes, but you can remember a movie for years. You can recall scenes, emotions, even exact lines, because everything is connected through a narrative. Stories create structure, they create movement, they create meaning. So instead of memorizing disconnected facts, you link them together. Let's test this. Imagine someone gives you a list: apple, horse, jacket, candle, ice cream, cloud, socks, chair, tree, monkey. Try to hold that in your mind. It's not easy. Now let's turn it into a story. A giant apple falls from the sky and lands on a horse. The horse panics, runs into a store, and grabs a jacket. Inside, it lights a candle, but the heat melts an ice cream cone. The ice cream turns into a cloud, which starts raining socks. One sock hits a chair, and suddenly the chair grows into a tree. From that tree, a monkey swings down and waves at you. Now close your eyes for a second. You can probably recall almost every item, and in order. Because now it's not a list anymore. It's a sequence, a chain reaction, a mini movie in your mind. That's the shift. When you stop memorizing and start storytelling, everything becomes easier. And here's something even more important. Most people think learning something once is enough. It's not. In fact, one-time learning is almost an illusion. You read something, it feels familiar, and you assume you've learned it. But a few days later, it's gone. That's not failure. That's how the brain naturally works.
There's actually a pattern called the forgetting curve. Without reinforcement, your brain quickly lets go of new information, not because it's weak, but because it's efficient. It keeps what it believes is important and discards the rest. So, how do you convince your brain something matters? You come back to it again and again, but at the right time. This is called spaced repetition. Instead of reviewing something nonstop, you space out your reviews. You learn it today, you revisit it later the same day, then the next day, then a couple days later, then again after a week. Each time you return to it, your brain strengthens that memory. It's like carving deeper and deeper into stone. Let's say you learn a new word, something like serendipity. You like it, you understand it, maybe even use it once, but if you never revisit it, it fades. Now imagine a different approach. You learn it today and use it in a sentence. Later, you say it out loud again. Tomorrow, you try using it in conversation. A few days later, you write a short example with it. A week later, you recognize it somewhere else. Now, it's no longer unfamiliar. It's part of you. And that's how real memory works. Not through repetition alone, but through meaningful, spaced interaction. Once you combine attention, visualization, storytelling, and repetition, something powerful starts to happen. Your brain stops leaking information, and for the first time, it starts holding on to what actually matters.
Now let's go deeper, because there's a hidden force behind memory that most people completely overlook: emotion. Think about the moments you remember most clearly from your life. Chances are they're not random or ordinary. They're moments that made you feel something intense: joy, embarrassment, fear, pride, even heartbreak. That's not a coincidence. Your brain is designed to prioritize emotional experiences. When something triggers a strong feeling, your brain flags it as important and stores it more deeply. So if you want to remember something, don't just understand it, feel it. Let's take a simple example. Imagine trying to memorize a historical fact, like the sinking of the Titanic. If you treat it like a number and a date, it's forgettable. But if you picture the scene, the freezing ocean, the chaos, the musicians playing as the ship went down, people saying goodbye to their loved ones, it transforms. Now it's not just information, it's human. And your brain holds on to human stories. You can apply this to anything. Learning a new word, connect it to a personal memory. Studying a concept, link it to something that excites you or challenges you. Even if the topic feels boring, you can create emotion around it. Make it dramatic, funny, or exaggerated. Your brain doesn't care if it's real or imagined. It just cares that it stands out. Now here's something even more powerful. If you really want to lock something into your memory, teach it. Not later, not when you feel ready, immediately. The moment you explain something to someone else, your brain shifts gears. You're no longer just receiving information, you're rebuilding it from scratch. And that process changes everything. Because to teach, you have to understand. You have to organize your thoughts. You have to put it in your own words. That forces clarity. Let's say you learn a new concept today. If you just read it and move on, your brain might treat it as temporary. But if you turn to a friend and say, "Hey, let me explain this," something different happens. You pause, you think, you reconstruct. And in doing that, you strengthen the memory. Even if there's no one around, you can still do this. Speak it out loud. Pretend you're explaining it to someone. Write it down like you're teaching a beginner. Record a voice note. The method doesn't matter. What matters is that you step into the role of the teacher. Because when you teach, you don't just remember, you own the knowledge. Now let's take this even further with one of the most powerful techniques ever used for memory. It's called the memory palace. And it works because your brain is incredibly good at remembering places. Think about your childhood home.
You can probably picture the layout, the rooms, the details without effort. That's because your brain naturally maps information to locations. The memory palace takes advantage of that. You choose a place you know well, your house, your school, even a route you walk often. Then you mentally place pieces of information in specific locations within that space. For example, imagine you want to remember a sequence of ideas. You walk through your home in your mind. At the front door, you place the first idea as a vivid image. In the living room, the second. In the kitchen, the third. Each location becomes a trigger. So later, when you mentally walk through that space again, the information comes back to you in order. It's structured, it's visual, and it's incredibly effective. This is how memory champions can recall massive amounts of data, because they're not memorizing randomly, they're organizing information in a way their brain naturally understands. Now here's something even more powerful. A simple habit that almost nobody uses, but can completely change how much you remember. Use the final minutes before sleep. When you go to bed, your brain doesn't shut off. It actually goes into a process of sorting and storing everything you experienced that day. So what you focus on right before sleep matters more than you think. If the last thing you do is scroll through random content, your brain treats that as important. But if you take just a few minutes to review what you learned, something powerful happens. You give your brain a clear signal. This matters. Keep this. Even 5 minutes is enough. Go over key ideas, say them quietly, visualize them, reflect on what stood out. Then sleep. And while you rest, your brain strengthens those connections. Finally, there's one more simple habit that acts like a save button for your mind. Write things down. Not typing, writing. When you write by hand, you slow down. You process more deeply. You engage both your mind and your body in the learning process. Instead of passively consuming information, you actively shape it. Take a concept, a word, or an idea. Write its meaning. Use it in a sentence. Connect it to your own life. In less than a minute, you've transformed it from something you saw into something you understand. And understood information is remembered information. At this point, you might notice something. Memory isn't about working harder. It's about working differently. And once you start applying these principles, your mind doesn't feel overloaded anymore. It starts to feel reliable, clear, even powerful. Because now, instead of chasing information, you're actually keeping it.
But there's one final shift that separates people who kind of remember from those who truly master information. And it's this: stop reviewing and start retrieving. Most people fall into a comfortable trap. They reread notes, replay videos, highlight lines, and tell themselves, yeah, I get it. It feels productive. It feels like learning. But here's the problem. Recognition is not memory. Just because something looks familiar doesn't mean you can recall it when it actually matters. Real memory begins the moment you close the book and test yourself. This is called active recall, and it's one of the most powerful mental habits you can build. Instead of feeding your brain the answer again, you force it to pull the answer out on its own. And that effort, that struggle, is exactly what strengthens your memory. Think of it like training a muscle. Watching someone lift weights won't make you stronger. Reading about it won't either. The growth happens when you lift. Your brain works the same way. After you learn something, pause, close everything, then ask yourself, what did I just learn? Try to explain it out loud. Try to write it from memory. Try to teach it again without looking. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You might forget parts. You might hesitate. That's not failure. That's the process working. Every time you successfully retrieve information, even partially, you're reinforcing the pathway that leads back to it.
And over time, that pathway becomes faster, stronger, and automatic. Now, combine this with everything you've already learned: attention, visualization, storytelling, repetition, emotion, structure, and space, and something incredible starts to happen. Your memory becomes dependable. But there's one last obstacle you need to remove, and it's not about technique, it's about environment. Your brain is overloaded. Not because you're learning too much, but because you're absorbing too much of the wrong things. From the moment you wake up, your attention is under attack. Notifications, short videos, endless scrolling, constant updates. Your brain is being flooded with information it never asked for. And here's the cost. When your mind is filled with noise, it has no space for what actually matters. Imagine trying to remember a simple grocery list: milk, bread, apples, soap, onions. It's easy, right? Now imagine creating that list and then immediately diving into messages, videos, headlines, and random content for the next hour. By the time you reach the store, half the list is gone. Not because it was difficult, but because it got buried. Your brain didn't lose it, it got crowded out. That's the hidden enemy of memory: overload. Your mind isn't meant to store everything. It's meant to select what matters. And if you don't control what goes in, you lose control of what stays. So here's the shift. Start treating your mind like a space that needs protection. Give it moments of silence. Even a few minutes in the morning without your phone can reset your focus. Let your thoughts settle before the noise begins. Reduce unnecessary input. Not everything deserves your attention. Every piece of content you consume competes with the things you're trying to remember. Create small habits that clear your mind. Writing down your thoughts, stepping away from screens, taking intentional breaks. These aren't luxuries, they're essential. Because memory doesn't just depend on what you learn, it depends on what you allow. And once you start protecting your mental space, everything else becomes easier. Focus improves, clarity returns, retention increases. At this point, you've seen the full picture. Memory isn't a mystery anymore. It's a system. A system built on attention, meaning, repetition, emotion, structure, and space. And here's the truth most people never realize. Knowing these ideas won't change anything. Using them will. So the question isn't whether your memory can improve. It can. The real question is what you do next. Do you slow down and pay attention when something matters? Do you turn information into images and stories? Do you revisit what you learn, teach it, test it, and protect your focus? Because if you do, even a few of these consistently, you won't just remember more, you'll remember what matters. And that changes everything.